The Scottish Highlands are beautiful and barren and bleak. Thousands of the people who lived here were cleared from the land over the last few centuries and replaced by sheep. And now most of the land is owned by less than 100 landlords, many of whom don't live here, absentee landlords. But that could be about to change. We'll begin our story here, where the last pitched battle on British soil was fought in April 1746, Culloden Moor. William, Duke of Cumberland, at the head of an army of Lowland Scots and English, crushed Charles Edward Stuart's Jacobite rebellion. It was a massacre. Bonnie Prince Charlie's Jacobites and clansmen were literally cut to pieces, mutilated beyond recognition. It wasn't English against Scot, it was Protestant against Catholic, Southerners against Northerners, and it signalled the end of the clan system. The clearances followed. It went on for over 100 years. This was the time they said the sheep ate men. Where did they go? At first to the coast and the lowlands, then to the Americas, mostly Canada, and in time to Australia and New Zealand. Their ruined villages left a mark on the land, and wherever the Highlanders and Islanders went over the seas, the land left a mark on them.
Mountains divide us and the waste of seas, yet still the blood is strong, the heart is Highland, and we in dreams behold the Hebrides.
In the Scottish Parliament in Edinburgh, a land reform bill is proposed that will give local people the right to buy the land, even if the landowners don't want to sell. Forced purchase, compulsory acquisition.
I suppose we're righting historical wrongs, and the primary purpose of the legislation is to open up to wider ownership, land tenure and land ownership in the more remote and rural parts of Scotland.
Labour member of the Scottish Parliament, Alan Wilson, is Deputy Minister for Regional Affairs. Not to put too fine a point on it, he's after the landlords. Sir John Nutting QC is a landlord, an absentee landlord.
Well, I am an absentee landlord in the sense that I am a landlord, but I don't live up here. But I don't live up here because I have to earn my bread in the south. These estates don't make profits. They're lucky if they wash their faces. And I can't afford to pay myself an income from this estate.
Sir John's estate sits across part of the Helmsdale River, a highland salmon river, and the bill, if made law, will allow local crofters, farmers, to buy the fishing rights, whether or not Sir John wants to sell.
It's an outrageous piece of legislation. It's sequestration, it's confiscation. It's depriving me and the 1,000 or so people who regularly fish this river every year. Why should they have their fishing devalued, their fishing taken away from them, in order to give it to another group of not much larger than 1,000 people, who have given nothing to the river, who haven't invested in it, and who've shown not much interest in it hitherto.
Sandy Murray is one of the people the Scottish Parliament and Sir John has in mind. He's a local crofter, a farmer who pays a nominal rent for his few hectares. And Sandy thinks the bill is a good idea.
Good. I think it's a good thing. I think that if the community do have a right to purchase, or the crofters have a right to purchase, then it might make some of the bad landlords stand up and think a little more.
Not all the Highlanders were cleared from the land. Some stayed behind and survived.
My ancestors were cleared out of the top end of Kildon Strath, and we came to Strathallydale. The biggest majority of them left this country and went to Nova Scotia and Canada.
Running a big estate holds no fears for this crofting survivor.
Although the landlords say that most of the estates run at a loss, I don't believe that for a minute. Most estates now will be running at a profit. I would say there was no difference in running an estate than in running a croft. It's a business on land, and I wouldn't think there's any difference. And crofters run and manage their crofts and try to make a living out of them.
But what about running a river?
All animal management is relatively the same. The sporting aspect of it is it's a sellable business, and it's no different than any other tourism industry.
The gillies on the river, I mean, the oldest serving gilly's been in the river about 38 years.
People can pay $500 and $600 a day to fish these rivers.
It's long acquired knowledge on how to catch the fish, the moods of the fish. You know, it's weather, temperature.
Every rock.
Every stone. I mean, it's a great knowledge to have.
Peter Quayle works for Sir John Nutting.
You've got ice in your hair.
Scotland for you.
That's fishing for you.
Peter thinks the proposed bill has brought nothing but uncertainty to the river workers, those expert fishermen called gillies. Where jobs were guaranteed for generations, now all bets are off.
Who's to say their jobs are safe after a community buyout? I mean, the Helmsdale's employed 10 people for the past 100 years and still employs 10 people.
It's not just salmon fishing on the Great Estates, there's deer stalking as well. And the stalkers believe that their jobs are at risk too.
Well, the workers who will be immediately affected are on the river. The superintendent, the bailiff and the gillies, the 5 gillies. But in addition, and this is equally important, the stalkers on the hill will lose their jobs because you cannot take the river away from the hill because the whole thing becomes economically unviable.
David Cotton is a former estate manager and now consultant to the estate workers. He doesn't think much of the Edinburgh Parliament.
I think they're complete bumblers. They haven't a clue. We have never been consulted. The ethos is exactly the same as the Mugabe land grab in that it's designed to create a great visual and emotional effect.
In this vast area, perhaps a third of Scotland, David Cotton represents only some 2,000 workers. But then the whole population is not much more than 200,000, and the gillies and stalkers alike are nervous.
3 gillies or bailiffs on rivers around and about have left already. 1 has gone to New Zealand. 2 have come to see me to sign papers to emigrate to Canada. They do not see a future for themselves. These are not urban people. These are country people in the clearest definition of the word. These are highly independent, expert people. They're not used to being messed around in a political way, and they won't put up with it. These are individualists.
Certainly the people that come and fish in the spring, I mean, they can be cracking the ice in the water to get their lines in the water, you know. It's pretty tough here in January and February.
This isn't a rich man's plaything in the sense that it's indulged by the 6 or 7 people who own this river. This is shared in the sense that it's rented, it's hired out to huge numbers of other people from all over the world, from Scotland, England, Australia, the continent, America, Canada, you name it, who come here regularly and enjoy the fishing on this river, for which they pay.
quite honestly, I feel that it's going to be absolutely disastrous for the Highlands. The main thing in the Highlands is that it's very difficult to make money on anything. Agriculture is completely uneconomic. Forestry is totally uneconomic. We're buying in timber from the Baltic states, which have been cut by slave labour. And the economy in the Highlands is really living, I think, entirely on subsidies.
Michael Bailey, the Lord Burton of Dock 4, has no doubt about Edinburgh's political movements and their historical base.
These left-wingers want to get rid of us. Well, this is what happened throughout all Central Europe and even in Russia itself. And I believe Putin the other day said he now realises it doesn't work.
The Baileys have been here for quite some time, about 600 years, and they managed to hold on to their estates after Culloden through a well-timed dose of diplomatic flu.
I think we were probably quite lucky during the Jacobite uprising, because the Bailey at the time was an invalid. People say, well, why do you stay? Well, it's been our home, and for, as I said, for all that time, we've tried to look after it. It is a lovely part of the world, but you just can't live on fresh air and the beauty of the countryside.
It's social engineering. It's the notion that 2 centuries after the clearances, the Scottish government have the right socially to engineer a situation in which, in some peculiar way, they perceive that they are going to return an asset that was confiscated from the local population, return that asset to the local community.
Call it social engineering. I would call it liberating for future generations the land in which people live and work.
The Land Reform Bill is just that, a bill. It's not law yet. It has great popular support in the cities, but it is creating considerable unrest amongst Highland estate workers.
Came here, we always have a quick look before we go to the target, no obstructions.
Brian Lyle has 1,000 deer to care for, and he won't let just anyone shoot his deer, not even for the $1,500 it could cost you. He makes every aspiring shooter pass a very tough test of accuracy.
If he isn't satisfactory at the target here, there's no point going any further, because the deer's welfare is the main thing here. It's my responsibility.
Not a man to cross, certainly not at less than 180 metres range. It's difficult to see this way of life continuing if the bill goes through. This and the salmon fishing have been carefully cultivated as rich people's pursuits, and cultivated by the rich for the rich, not some collective.
Well, we've waited for over 100 years for this type of legislation. We want to remove the obstacles to more community land ownership, to ensure that land can be used by communities for more economic development, to repopulate our more remote highland and island areas. And we see this as a tremendous opportunity to modernise the system of land ownership and tenure in Scotland.
If the legislation goes through, we shall contest it in the European courts, and do whatever we can and whatever is necessary to overturn it.
Then why do you do it?
Love. Love and a sense of the tradition of the trusteeship. I will not call it the ownership. The trusteeship of one of the last great wildernesses of the British Isles.
Trusteeships, community ownerships, liberating land, uneven and unequal distribution. None of it seems terribly relevant when you look around.
This is a wet desert. We always come back to the landowner, providing the wherewithal so that we can bring in deer stalkers and fishermen to help pay our wages. There is nothing you can do with this country.
Well, not quite. You can just look at it.